You think I don't see you? The man's voice cut through the heat like a blade. Move that piece of junk before I have it towed. Sarah Whitmore didn't move. She stood at that gas pump with her chin up and her hands steady, even though every word he said landed like a slap. She had been through harder things than this. She told herself that. She almost believed it. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who thought their money made them better than you, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The day had started the way most of Sarah Whitmore's days started, with somebody else's problem landing in her lap before she'd even finished her first cup of coffee. She had driven 40 minutes out to the edge of town that morning to help an elderly woman named Dolores pack up her late husband's belongings. Dolores had called the community center 3 times in 2 days, each call quieter than the last, like she was losing the nerve to ask for help. Sarah had called her back herself, listened for nearly an hour, and then shown up at 7 in the morning with boxes and tape and a patience that most people didn't have for strangers. That was Sarah. That had always been Sarah. She wasn't paid for it. She didn't have a title that came with it. She just showed up because, in her experience, showing up was the thing most people were too busy or too self-conscious to do. She'd been doing it since she was 19 years old, first through the church youth group, then through the county social services volunteer program, then through whatever informal network of neighbors and friends and complete strangers who somehow always found her number when they needed someone. She drove an old pickup truck that had more miles on it than she could comfortably count, and the paint on the driver's side door had faded from a deep forest green to something closer to the color of old moss. The passenger seat had a crack in the vinyl that she'd patched twice with electrical tape. The radio only picked up 3 stations reliably, and one of them was Spanish language gospel, which she had grown to genuinely love, even though she didn't speak a word of Spanish. She loved that truck the way you love something that has never let you down. By 4 in the afternoon, she was 2 towns over from home, running on an empty tank and a granola bar she'd eaten in the parking lot of Dolores's building. She pulled into the gas station on Route 9 the way she always did, slowly checking the pump placement, pulling up on the right side, cutting the engine cleanly. It was a habit Cole had drilled into her years ago. Always pull up right so somebody else can share the pump if they need to. Leave room. Be considerate. She got out of the truck and reached into her purse for her debit card. The pump screen was already showing an error message. She stared at it for a second, swiped the card again. Another error. She tilted the card, checked the strip, tried once more. Error. Great, she said quietly to no one. She looked around the pump island. There was a handwritten sign taped to the side of the machine that she hadn't noticed, small, faded in blue ballpoint pen on the back of a receipt, out of order. Please use inside register. She nodded to herself, tucked her purse under her arm, and started walking toward the station door. That was when she heard the engine. It was the kind of engine that made a statement before the car even stopped, a low, expensive purr that seemed designed to make other sounds feel inferior. A black Mercedes SUV pulled onto the pump island and stopped directly behind her truck, angled in a way that made it clear the driver had decided her truck was an inconvenience and positioned himself accordingly. The door opened. A man got out. I was somewhere in his mid-40s, with the kind of build that suggested he had once been athletic and now paid someone to maintain the illusion. His shirt was the kind of casual that cost $400. His watch caught the afternoon sun and threw a small, sharp reflection across the concrete. He looked at Sarah's truck the way people look at something they want removed. Sarah kept walking. She had 15 feet to the door. Excuse me. His voice was loud enough to carry and pitched in a way that made it clear he expected a response. She stopped, turned around. Yeah, is that your truck? It is. He made a gesture with his hand, a loose, dismissive wave like he was shooing a bird. I need that pump. You want to move it along? Sarah felt the first small flicker of something in her chest. Not anger, not yet. Just that particular awareness that comes when someone decides before they've said a word that you are beneath them. The pump's out of order, she said, keeping her voice even. I was just going inside to pay at the register. How long is that going to take? She looked at him for a moment. As long as it takes. Something shifted in his expression. He wasn't used to that kind of answer, not from someone who looked like her driving what she drove. He took a step toward the pump, read the out-of-order sign, and then look back at her truck like it was her fault the machine was broken. "You've got to be kidding me," he said under his breath. Then louder, "So you're just going to leave that thing sitting there while you wander around inside?" "I'm going to pay for my gas," Sarah said. "Same as you'll do when you go inside." "I'm not going inside." He said it like the idea was absurd. "I pay at the pump." "Then you'll need to use a different pump." He stared at her. Then he made a sound, not quite a laugh, something between a scoff and a dismissal, and shook his head slowly, like she was failing some test she hadn't known she was taking. "What year is that thing even?" He nodded at her truck. 90-something. Sarah didn't answer. "You know what? Never mind. Forget the year." He crossed his arms. "Just how long have you been driving that I'm trying to understand what kind of person holds up a pump with that?" The small flicker in Sarah's chest became something steadier. A heat. Not rage. She had never been someone who went to rage quickly, but a slow, controlled burn that she recognized and knew how to manage. "The kind of person," she said carefully, "who stops for gas when her tank is empty. Same as you." "Not really the same." "I think exactly the same." He tilted his head. "You think driving that," he paused, let the word land, "thing is the same as driving what I drive." "I think needing gas is the same," she said. "The vehicle is irrelevant." He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "That's a real optimistic way to look at your situation." A man walking past with a coffee and a bag of chips slowed down slightly, glanced between them, and kept walking. Sarah noticed. Nathan noticed that she noticed. He raised his voice just slightly, not shouting, just enough to make sure anyone nearby would hear. "I'm just saying, most people who care about other people's time don't show up to a gas station in something that should have been retired a decade ago, that's all." Sarah took one breath, then another. She had two choices. She could walk away. She had done it before, walked away from moments exactly like this, told herself that some people weren't worth her energy. Gone home and cried quietly in the bathroom where nobody could hear her, and then made dinner and helped Cole with whatever he needed and moved on. She could do that, or she could say the thing that was already forming in her throat. "I don't know your name," she said. "What? Your name? I don't know it. You don't know mine. We're strangers." She kept her voice steady. "And you've been talking to me for 2 minutes like I owe you something, like I did something wrong by needing gas. Like I should be ashamed of myself for driving a truck that doesn't look like your car." She stopped. "Let that sit. What did I do to you?" For a half second, just a half second, something crossed his face that might have been hesitation. Then it closed over. "I don't have time for this," he said. "Neither do I." She turned back toward the door. "Hey." She kept walking. "I said hey." She pushed the door open and walked inside. The man behind the register was named Earl, and he had been working that station for 11 years. He was a heavy-set man with a gray beard and the permanent squint of someone who has spent decades looking out at a sun-bleached parking lot. He looked up when Sarah came in. "The number 3 pump," she said. "Out of order sign on it." "Yeah, I know." Earl made a face. "Been meaning to replace it. You want to pay inside, please." "How much?" "Fill it up. I'll come back in when I know the total." She hesitated. "There's a man out there, black Mercedes." Earl glanced through the window. "I see him. He's having a hard day, I think." Earl looked at her, then back out the window. "You want me to go out there?" "No," Sarah shook her head. "I just wanted someone to know he was out there." She went back outside. Nathan was on his phone now, pacing beside his car, with the particular energy of a man performing frustration for an audience he'd invented in his own head. He glanced at her when she came out, but went back to his phone. She unlocked her truck, got in, pulled it around to the working pump on the other side of the island, which had been empty the entire time. She heard him stop pacing. "There was another pump," he said. She looked at him through the open window. "There was another pump. You could have moved there from the start. The out-of-order sign was on my pump. I didn't know the other one was clear until I looked." She paused. "I would have gone to it immediately if you'd said something like a normal person." He stared at her. "But you didn't," she said. "You started with the truck." She rolled the window up. She heard him say something. She didn't catch it clearly. She started fueling up and looked straight ahead at the highway in the distance and breathed. She thought she was done with him. She was wrong. It took 4 minutes to fill the tank. 4 minutes during which Nathan Caldwell apparently decided he had not finished. She heard the footsteps on the concrete before she heard the voice. You know what your problem is? Sarah kept her eyes on the fuel gauge. You've got this attitude, he said, like you're better than your situation. Like I'm supposed to feel bad about pointing out the obvious. She turned to look at him. He was standing about 6 feet away, arms still crossed, phone in one hand. What is the obvious? She asked. That you're clearly struggling. He said it like he was doing her a favor. And there's no shame in that, but don't take it out on people who've worked hard. I work hard. I'm sure you do. Don't do that. Do what? Say, I'm sure you do in that voice. She faced him fully. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I do, where I've been today, who I helped, what I've built, what I've lost, what I've kept. You saw my truck and you decided. He opened his mouth. She kept going. You decided before I said one word that I was less than you, and then you looked for things to confirm it. That's what you did. Her voice was still controlled, still quiet. That's not working hard. That's just being unkind to a stranger for no reason. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his money clip, peeled off 2 bills, and held them out toward her. Not offering, more like dropping. He let his fingers open and the bills fluttered to the concrete between them. There, he said. Get your tank filled, get a coffee, whatever. The fuel nozzle clicked off. Full tank. Sarah looked at the money on the ground, looked at him, looked at the money again. She didn't pick it up. I already paid for my gas, she said. Then use it for something else. I don't want your money. Don't be proud. Don't mistake self-respect for pride. She pulled the nozzle out and hung it back on the pump. I'm not struggling. I'm not helpless. I'm not waiting for a man like you to rescue me. She capped her tank. And you throwing money at the ground doesn't make you generous. It makes you exactly what I already thought you were. She got in her truck. She drove out of the parking lot without looking in the rearview mirror, but her hands were shaking on the wheel by the time she hit the highway. She made it 12 miles before she had to pull over. Not because anything was wrong with the truck, because something was wrong with her breathing, and she needed to get the shaking out of her hands before she drove another mile. She sat on the side of the road with the engine idling and both hands pressed flat against her thighs and just breathed. In, out, in, out. She had done everything right. She had kept her voice steady. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't cried in front of him. She had left with her dignity intact, and she knew that. She knew she had conducted herself well. But knowing that didn't stop the way her chest felt right now, like something had been pressed there, like a thumb pushing down on a bruise. She thought about Dolores, who that morning had grabbed her hand and said, "You remind me that people are still good." She thought about the elderly man at the community center last Tuesday, who had called her his guardian angel without a hint of irony. She thought about the woman 2 streets over whose car had broken down in January, and whom Sarah had driven to work for 3 weeks straight without being asked. She thought about all of that, and then she thought about Nathan Caldwell's face when he dropped that money on the ground. And she cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly the way you cry when you're tired and something hits the exact right nerve. Her shoulders shook twice, and then she got herself back because she had never been someone who fell apart for long. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her flannel shirt, checked her mirrors, and pulled back onto the road. She would go home. Cole would be at the clubhouse, or he'd be home, one or the other. She would figure out how to tell him what happened. Or maybe she wouldn't tell him. Maybe she'd just make dinner and let it go and let it become one of those things she carried quietly. She hadn't decided yet. The Whitmore place was a house that looked like the people who lived in it. Sturdy, unpretentious, every room used for something real. The porch had 2 chairs and a small table where Cole drank his morning coffee when the weather allowed it. The front yard had a garden that Sarah maintained with the same quiet commitment she brought to everything. Tomatoes, peppers, a patch of sunflowers that had no practical purpose, and that she grew anyway because they made her happy. Cole's bike was in his driveway. She pulled in beside it and sat in the truck for a moment before getting out. She checked her face in the visor mirror. Her eyes were a little red, nothing dramatic. She pulled her hair back and got out. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled like coffee in the particular leather and oil scent that had embedded itself into the furniture over years. Cole was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a mug, and his phone reading something with the focused expression he used for anything that required actual thinking. He looked up when she came in. I didn't say anything for a second. Just looked at her the way he had looked at her for 11 years, steady, present, reading everything she wasn't saying. What happened? He said. Nothing. Sarah. She put her purse down on the table. It was nothing, Cole. Just a long day. You're upset. I'm tired. He set his phone down. Come sit down. I'm fine standing. He waited. She made it about 30 seconds. There was a man at the gas station on Route 9, she said. He was rude to me. That's it? Rude how? She told him. She told him all of it. The pump, the comments about the truck, the crowd that gathered without anyone helping, the money dropped on the ground. She told it the way she always told things, precisely without embellishment, which somehow made it worse rather than better, because there was no performance covering the reality of what had happened. Cole listened to every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pace. He stood at that counter with his arms crossed and his mug in one hand and his eyes on her face, and he listened until she was completely done. Then he was quiet for a moment. He threw the money on the ground, Cole said. Yes. Not handed it to you, dropped it. Dropped it. Let it fall. Yes. Cole set the mug down. Did you pick it up? No, he nodded slowly. Good. I'm not upset about the money, Sarah said quickly. I want you to understand that. It's not about the money. I know it's not about the money. It's about the way he looked at me, like I was, she paused, looking for the word that fit. Like I was already decided. Before I opened my mouth, before I said anything, he looked at the truck and decided what I was. Yeah, Cole said quietly. And I know that's not about me, she said. I know it's about him. I know what kind of person does that. I know it doesn't reflect anything true about my life. She exhaled. I still hate the way it felt. Cole moved around the counter and came to where she was standing. He didn't say anything right away. He put both hands on her shoulders and she let him, and for a moment they just stood there in their kitchen with the late afternoon light coming through the window. Tell me his name, Cole said. I don't know his name. Did he say anything about who he was? What he did? He had a nice car, nice watch. He talked like someone who was used to being listened to. What did he look like? She described him, the build, the shirt, the watch, the way he carried himself. Cole was quiet again. Cole, she said, I'm thinking. Don't, she stopped, started again. I don't need you to fix this. He looked at her. I know you don't need me to fix it. Then don't. I'm not going to fix it, he said. I'm going to find out who he is. That's the same thing. No, it's not. He said it calmly, definitively. Fixing it would be riding out there and finding him tonight and letting him understand with my hands why you don't treat a woman that way. He held her gaze. Finding out who he is just information. What we do with information, he paused. That's a conversation. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. You have that look, she said. What look? The one where you've already decided, but you're giving me the courtesy of the conversation. He almost smiled. I've been married to you for 11 years. I know better than to already decide. Cole. Sarah. He held her eyes. That man made you pull over on the side of the road. You don't do that. In 11 years, you have never pulled over on the side of the road. She opened her mouth, closed it. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. It's man. By the time Cole made 3 phone calls, they had a name. Nathan Caldwell, 44 years old, owner of Caldwell Property Group, a real estate development company that operated across 4 counties and had been in the local business news twice in the past year. Once for a commercial development deal that displaced a long-standing family-owned hardware store, and once for a profile piece that described him as a self-made man who believed in hard work and high standards. The man who had written the description of his high standards had clearly never watched him at a gas pump. He's got a dinner tonight, said the voice on the phone. It belonged to a man named Richie who worked at the county office and owed Cole a favor from 3 years back that had never been formally acknowledged between them, but was the kind of favor that doesn't expire. Big thing at the Meridian, investor dinner. It's for some new commercial project he's trying to fund. What time? 7, but it started at 6:30, so they're already there. Cole looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was 6:42. He looked at Sarah. She was sitting at the kitchen table now, both hands wrapped around the mug of tea she'd made herself while he was on the phone. She was watching him, not nervous, not angry, angry, just watching the way she always watched when she was trying to read ahead of where the conversation was going. His name is Nathan Caldwell, Cole said. She absorbed that. Property developer. Yeah, the one who pushed out the hardware store on Miller Street. Same one. She looked down at her mug. Of course. Cole came and sat across from her. I want to tell you something before I say anything else. She looked up. I'm not angry, he said. You are angry. I'm angry. He corrected himself immediately without embarrassment. But I'm not going to do anything because of the anger. I'm going to do something because of the principle. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. There's a difference. What's the principle? That a man who is used to deciding who matters and who doesn't. He stopped finding the words, should at least once in his life have to look at the person he dismissed and explain himself. Sarah was quiet. Not threatened, Cole said, not hurt, not scared, just he spread his hands flat on the table, accountable. She looked at those hands. She had known those hands for 11 years. She knew what they were capable of in both directions. If I say no, she said, what happens? Nothing. Cole, nothing, he said again, and this time she believed him completely because that was the other thing she knew about him. After 11 years, he was a man who kept his word to her in every direction, including the ones that cost him something. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the evening had gone soft and orange. She could hear faintly the sound of Cole's brothers gathering. She hadn't heard anyone arrive, but she could feel it, the way you feel a storm gathering, not in any one sound, but in the collective pressure of them. I want to go, she said. I know. This isn't your story to tell, it's mine. I know that too. I'm not going there to watch you frighten him. I know. I'm going there to say something myself. Cole nodded. Then we go together. She took one more sip of her tea, set the mug down, straightened her shoulders in the same quiet way she had straightened them at the gas pump, because that was who she was. Not someone who prepared dramatically, but someone who just found their posture and their footing and moved. How many are coming? She asked. Cole almost smiled again. Enough. Don't make it a spectacle. It'll be exactly as much of a spectacle as Nathan Caldwell deserves, he said, which based on what I know about him, he paused, is probably more than he's comfortable with. She stood up, picked up her flannel shirt from the back of the chair, put it on over her t-shirt. Cole stood too. He picked up his the leather vest that bore the patch she had looked at 1,000 times in 1,000 different moments of their shared life. And that still meant the same thing to her, that it had always meant that this man belonged to something larger than himself, and that something had a code and the code was real. He put it on. They walked out of the house together. In the driveway and along the street, engines were already turning over. 8 bikes, 9. She stopped counting. She walked to the passenger side of the truck, her truck with its faded paint and its cracked vinyl seat and its 3 radio stations and its 200,000 miles of showing up, and she got in. Cole got on his bike. He looked at her through the windshield. She nodded once. He nodded back. They pulled out into the Arizona evening, into the last of the light, moving toward a man who had decided that morning that Sarah Whitmore was nobody. He was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. The Meridian sat on the edge of downtown like it had always been there, like it had been built specifically for men like Nathan Caldwell to feel important in. Private dining, valet parking, the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices because the people who ate there weren't supposed to think about prices. Nathan was on his second glass of wine and his best story. On had a way of telling stories that made him the hero of every one of them. He'd refined it over years, the pause before the punchline, the self-deprecating detail that was actually a brag in disguise, the way he leaned back in his chair at the exact moment he wanted the room to know he was comfortable with himself. The 4 investors around the table that night were laughing at the right moments, nodding at the right moments, refilling their glasses at the right moments. It was going exactly the way he had planned. His business partner, a thin man named Gregory Foss, who had known Nathan for 12 years and trusted him in the way people trust someone when they've made money together, was seated to his left. Gregory was quieter than Nathan always had been, but he had a gift for reading rooms that Nathan relied on without ever acknowledging. You're relaxed tonight, Gregory said under the noise of the table. It's a good deal, Nathan said. I'm always relaxed when the deal is good. The Hendricks parcel. Signed and done. We break ground in 10 weeks. And the zoning issue, Nathan waved his hand, handled. Gregory studied him for a moment. You had a good day. Had a little bump on the way here. Nathan reached for his wine. Gas station situation. Woman with a truck that should have been junked 5 years ago, holding up the pump like she had all the time in the world. What happened? Nothing. Nathan shrugged. I was direct with her. She got emotional. I offered to help, and she made it into something it wasn't. He took a sip. Some people can't accept that not everyone's situation is equal. Gregory said nothing. She'll be fine, Nathan said. People like that are always fine. They're used to it. He turned back to the table. He did not think about her again, not until the sound started. It began as something low, something that didn't quite belong to the restaurant's ambient noise, not the clinking of glasses, or the murmur of adjacent tables, or the soft music piped through the ceiling speakers. It was outside, but it was growing, and it had a specific texture to it that Nathan couldn't immediately identify. Then he recognized it. Motorcycles. Not one, not two. A cluster of them, engines rolling down together with the kind of synchronized weight that turned heads without trying to. The conversation at the table continued. Nathan reached for the bread basket. Gregory glanced toward the front of the restaurant, where the glass facade gave a partial view of the valet area outside. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted a millimeter of tension across the shoulders that Nathan, who had known him for 12 years, caught immediately. What? Nathan said. Nothing, Gregory said. Nathan looked toward the front of the restaurant. Through the glass, he could see the bikes pulling in. He couldn't count them from this angle, but there were enough of them to fill the valet area. Enough of them that the valets had stopped moving and were simply watching. The bikes were stopping in align engines, cutting off one by one, and the sudden sequential silencing of that many engines created its own sound, a dropping away of noise that was somehow louder than the noise itself. Cole, one of the investors, said, peering toward the front. Is that a club? Nathan set the bread down. The doors to the Meridian opened. Cole Whitmore walked in first. I was not a small man, and he did not walk like a man who was uncertain about where he was going. He was wearing his cut-the-leather vest with the Hells Angels patches that had been earned through years. Nathan Caldwell couldn't begin to imagine, and beneath it a plain, dark shirt, and he moved through the entrance of that restaurant with the particular calm of someone who has nothing to prove because the proof is already written in the way they carry themselves. Behind him came the others. 6 men in their cuts, moving without noise, without aggression, without anything that could be pointed to as threat. They simply entered. They filled space. And then walking beside Cole was Sarah. She was still in her flannel shirt and jeans. She hadn't changed. She hadn't done anything to make herself look like someone who belonged in the Meridian, and that was the exact thing that made her impossible to dismiss. She hadn't tried to become something different to walk through that door. She walked in as exactly who she was. Nathan recognized her in the same instant. His stomach dropped. Nathan, Gregory said quietly, do you know those people? Nathan didn't answer. The host at the front was speaking to Cole. Nathan could see it, the host's hands in a placating gesture, the particular body language of someone trying to redirect a situation they don't have the authority to handle. Cole listened politely. He said something. The host listened. Cole said something else. The host stepped aside. They walked toward Nathan's table. The restaurant had gone quiet in that incremental way that restaurants go quiet, not all at once, not dramatically, but table by table, as the awareness of something different moved through the room. Conversation slowed. Forks paused. People looked. And Nathan Caldwell, who had built a career on never being caught off balance, felt the floor shift. One of the investors, the youngest one, a man named Brett, who was 36 and had the particular confidence of someone who had never been genuinely afraid of anything, leaned forward slightly. Nathan, what's? Sit down, Nathan said too quickly, too quietly. Brett sat. Cole stopped at the edge of the table. I didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at Nathan with an expression that Nathan couldn't read at first, and then could, because it wasn't anger, and it wasn't contempt, and it wasn't any of the things Nathan's body had braced itself for. It was assessment, the kind of look that takes something apart, quietly finds every structural weakness, and then puts it back together so you know it's been seen. You're Nathan Caldwell, Cole said. It wasn't a question. Nathan wanted very badly to say something sharp, something that would reorient this situation, put it back on ground. He understood. But what came out of his mouth was yes. Cole nodded. He pulled out the chair across from Nathan, unhurried, deliberate, and sat down. He did not ask permission. He did not look around for a reaction. He simply sat, placed both forearms on the table, and looked at Nathan like they had all the time in the world. "My name is Cole Whitmore," he said. "I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to take a moment before you answer it." Nathan's jaw was tight. "I don't know what you think." "The question," Cole said with a patience that was more unsettling than any raised voice, "is whether you remember the woman at the key station on Route 9 this afternoon." The table was silent. The investors were silent. Gregory was looking at Nathan with an expression Nathan didn't want to examine. "I don't see what," Nathan started. "That's a yes or no," Cole said. "Do you remember her?" Nathan looked at Sarah. She was standing slightly to Cole's left, not hiding behind him, not positioned as though she needed his protection. She was just there looking at Nathan with the same steadiness she had shown at the gas pump, that quality that had frustrated him there, and that he now recognized with a clarity that landed in his chest like something cold, as not stubbornness or attitude but simply self-possession. "Yes," Nathan said, "I remember her." "She's my wife," Cole said. The words were quiet. They landed anyway. "And that," Cole paused, "doesn't change anything about what you owe her. Whether she was my wife or a total stranger, you owe her the same thing. I want to be clear about that. But she's my wife and I'm here, and that's the context." Nathan looked around the table. 4 investors watching, Gregory watching, the adjacent tables watching, a restaurant full of people who were no longer looking at their food. I'm at a calculation. He had been making calculations his whole life. Reading rooms, reading people, determining where the power sat and how to position himself relative to it. He made that calculation now and came to a conclusion he did not like. He was the one without the power. "Look," Nathan said, shifting his register to something more reasonable, more negotiable, because negotiation was what he knew. "There may have been a misunderstanding this afternoon. I was in a hurry. If I came across—" "Tell me what you said to her," Cole said. Nathan blinked. "I'm sorry." "What you said?" "No." "Tell me." Cole's voice had not changed, still the same even unhurried tone. "Not your version of why you said it, not the context, just what you said." A beat of silence. "I don't remember the exact words." Cole looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Nathan. "You said my truck should have been retired a decade ago," she said. Her voice was quiet and clear, and it traveled in that silence. "You said I had an attitude. You said I was struggling, and I should accept that." She didn't look away from him. "And you took money out of your clip and dropped it on the ground." Brett, the youngest investor, sat back in his chair. Just slightly. Just enough. "I said," Nathan stopped. "You dropped it," Sarah said. "You didn't hand it to me. You let it fall on the concrete and you watched to see if I'd pick it up." Gregory Foss had been quiet for 4 minutes. He cleared his throat, now not to speak, just as reflex, and the sound seemed to crystallize something in the room. Nathan looked at his partner. Gregory was looking at the table. That told Nathan more than anything that had happened in the last 4 minutes. "I offered to help," Nathan said. But even as he said it, he heard it, the thinness of it, the way it rang against what Sarah had just described, and failed to hold. "You threw money at her," Cole said. On the ground." "I didn't mean it as—" "What did you mean it as?" Cole asked. Nathan opened his mouth. He had 100 answers available. He always had answers available. It was one of the things he was genuinely good at. But every answer that came up he discarded. Not because Cole was threatening him, not because of the men standing behind Cole, but because every answer he found was a version of a story he'd been telling himself for years, and he could suddenly see with a precise and uncomfortable clarity that the story was wrong. He said nothing. Cole leaned forward slightly. "I'm going to tell you something that's true," he said, "and I'm telling you because you deserve to hear something true from somebody tonight." He held Nathan's eyes. "You saw a woman at a gas pump, older truck, casual clothes, card that wasn't working, and you decided in the first 10 seconds that she was below you. Not because she'd done anything, not because you knew her, just because of the truck and the card." He paused. "And once you decided that, everything else was just confirming what you'd already decided. That's not reading a situation. That's constructing one." Nathan's face was very still. "The thing about people like you," Cole said, and then he stopped himself. He shook his head slightly, started again. "The thing that costs men like you the most isn't losing money. It's this. It's a room full of people seeing you in the same 10 seconds you saw my wife and deciding the same thing you decided about her. He let that sit. Whether that's fair or not, that's a conversation. But it's the same standard. The silence in the restaurant had achieved a particular quality. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like held, like everyone in the room was holding a breath they hadn't meant to take. Brett was looking at Nathan differently now. Nathan could see it. 12 months ago, he'd pitched Brett's firm on the Riverside development, and Brett had told his associates that Nathan Caldwell was exactly the kind of operator they wanted to be in business with, decisive, unsentimental, efficient. Nathan knew this because Brett had told him directly over a handshake and a bourbon. He wondered what Brett would say now. Sarah pulled out the empty chair beside Cole and sat down. The action was so simple and so unexpected that the shift it created was disproportionate to its size. She sat down at Nathan Caldwell's investor dinner table in her flannel shirt, and her jeans, folded her hands in front of her and looked at him like she had every right to be there. Because she did. "I want to say something," she said, "and I need you to actually listen." Nathan looked at her. "I cried today," she said. "I pulled over on the highway and I sat there and I cried. Not because of the money, not because of the truck comments, but because I had spent the entire day helping somebody who didn't have anyone else. And then I stopped for gas and a stranger looked at me and decided in 10 seconds that I was worthless." She paused. "I know you don't think of it as deciding I was worthless. You probably think of it as honesty, directness. You probably tell yourself that you just see things clearly and you say what you observe." She tilted her head. "But what you observe is determined by what you already believe. And what you believed when you looked at my truck and my car that wasn't working was that people in that situation don't deserve the same courtesy as people in your situation." She leaned forward slightly. "And that is a decision. It's a choice you made. And I need you to know that." Nathan had not been spoken to like this, and he tried to remember. He couldn't. He had been argued with. He had been threatened. He had been praised and negotiated with, and flattered and occasionally confronted. But he had not in a very long time been spoken to by someone who was simply telling him the truth as she experienced it, without performance, without agenda, without anything to gain from it. He had the strangest sensation that his face was very warm. "I didn't know who you were," he said. It came out smaller than he'd intended. "I know you didn't," Sarah said. "That's the point." Cole was watching the two of them. "I hadn't expected this." He had known Sarah would want to speak, and he had always known that about her, that when she was ready to say something, she said it completely. But the precision of it, the way she had walked into this room in her flannel shirt and her conviction, and done what she'd told him she wanted to do, which was say something herself, that still moved him. After 11 years, it still moved him. One of the investors, an older man, silver-haired, who had not spoken yet, cleared his throat and looked at Nathan. "I didn't know this was part of the evening," the man said. His name was Henderson. He'd been building shopping centers for 40 years and had been in business with Nathan for 18 months. "It wasn't," Nathan said. "No," Henderson said. "I can see that." He looked at Sarah. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Sarah looked at him, surprised, not by the question, but by the gentleness of it. "I'm okay," she said. "Thank you." Henderson looked back at Nathan. The look wasn't hostile. It wasn't sympathetic either. It was the particular look of a man in his mid-60s who has lived long enough to know that what just happened tells you something real about a person and that you had better account for it. Nathan read that look correctly, and the calculation he ran was very different from the one he'd run 4 minutes ago. He looked at Cole. "What do you want?" he said, not aggressively, genuinely. Cole regarded him. "I want you to understand something." "What?" "That there are rooms you'll never be in that matter more than this one." Cole glanced around the restaurant, then back. "And there are people you'll never have to justify yourself to that you should have been justifying yourself to your whole life." He stood up from the chair. "I don't want your apology. I don't want your money. I don't want you afraid of us because we're not here to make you afraid." He straightened. "I want you to sit with what happened here. I want that to cost you something the way it cost her something. And I want you to think very carefully the next time you see someone at a gas pump with an old truck and a car that isn't working." He stepped back from the table. Sarah stood up too. She looked at Nathan one more time. "I hope you have a good rest of your evening," she said. She said it without irony. "I mean that." She turned and walked back through the restaurant. Cole followed. The six men fell in behind them, unhurried, silent, moving through the room and back toward the entrance, with the same ease with which they'd arrived. Nathan Caldwell sat at his table and watched them go. He heard the door open and close. He heard a few seconds later the engine starting outside. He sat with the sound of them until it faded, and then the restaurant noise filled back in around him. Voices, silverware, the quiet music, and everything returned to normal, except for the fact that nothing felt normal. Gregory Foss picked up his wine glass. He didn't drink from it. He turned the stem between his fingers and looked at it. Motorcycle Club, Henderson said. He said it neutrally, like he was naming a fact. Hell's Angels, Brett said. He had clearly already looked it up on his phone. That woman worked at the community center on Willowbrook, said the fourth investor, a woman named Carla, who had been silent the entire time, and who was looking at her phone now with an expression of quiet discovery. There's a page here, volunteer work, food drives. She's been doing it for years. She set the phone face down. She spent today helping an elderly woman pack up her late husband's belongings. Carla looked at Nathan. That's what she was doing before the gas station. The table was quiet. Nathan picked up his wine glass. He thought about the money on the ground. He thought about the way Sarah had looked at it, and then at him, and then gotten in her truck without touching it. He thought about Cole's voice, that even unhurried, completely controlled voice, and what it had said, I want that to cost you something, the way it cost her something. Nathan, Gregory said. Nathan looked at him. Gregory was quiet for a moment. He chose his words carefully, the way he always did. I'm going to say this once, and then I'm going to let it go, and we're going to finish this dinner. Okay. That was badly done, Gregory said. Whatever happened at the gas station, and whatever you told yourself about it after that, was badly done. And you know it. He put the wine glass down. Now you know it publicly, which is harder. But that's not my problem to solve. He straightened his jacket. The project still moves forward. The deal is still good. But what you do with what happened tonight, he looked at Nathan steadily, that's yours. Nathan said nothing. Henderson cleared his throat. Shall we order dessert? The conversation moved on the way. Conversations move on at tables where everyone agrees without saying it that it's time. But Nathan Caldwell remained somewhere else, somewhere back at a gas pump in the afternoon heat, looking at a card that wouldn't work, and a woman who hadn't asked for his help, and a moment that he had turned into something he had no right to turn it into. He had told himself the story was over when she drove away. He understood now that it hadn't been over then. He wasn't sure it was over now. Outside, the last of the engines faded into the Arizona dark. Cole rode at the front of the line. Sarah's truck was behind him, headlights steady moving at a pace that matched his without effort, the way they had always moved through things together. She had her window down. The air was warm and dry and smelled like the desert, the way it always did in the evening, like the heat releasing itself slowly after holding on all day. She felt lighter. Not because Nathan Caldwell was a changed man. She didn't know if he was, and she didn't need to. Not because she had won something, because that wasn't the right frame for what had happened. She felt lighter because she had said the things she needed to say to the person who needed to hear it in her own words, in her own clothes, on her own terms. She had walked into the Meridian as Sarah Whitmore, volunteer neighbor wife woman, in a flannel shirt who drove a truck with faded paint, and she had walked out as the same person. That was enough. Cole looked back at her once in his mirrors. She caught the look. She lifted two fingers off the wheel, and the small wave that was theirs had been theirs since year one of their marriage. The private signal that meant, I'm here, I'm okay, I see you. He turned back to the road. They rode home through the dark, and the night was quiet around them. And somewhere behind them, in a restaurant with no prices on the menu, a man sat with a glass of wine and the specific uncomfortable weight of a reckoning he had not known was coming. It was just beginning to settle into him. Nathan Caldwell did not sleep well that night. Han had gone home from the Meridian at 9:15, which was earlier than he'd planned because the dinner had lost its shape after Cole and Sarah left, and nobody at the table had the appetite to rebuild it. Henderson had ordered dessert and eaten it quietly. Brett had looked at his phone more than he'd looked at anyone. Carla had asked two businesslike questions about the Hendricks parcel timeline and then requested the check. Gregory had said good night in the parking lot without his usual debrief, which was the thing that sat with Nathan the longest on the drive home. Gregory always debriefed. 12 years of partnership, and Gregory always had something to say after a dinner, something to assess, something to refine. I hadn't said a word. Nathan had poured himself 2 fingers of scotch at home and sat in the chair by the window and tried to run the evening back the way he always ran things, back analytically with distance, the way you reviewed a deal that had gone sideways to find the correctable error. But every time he tried to find the correctable error, he kept arriving at the same place, the money on the ground. He kept seeing it, 2 bills dropping from his fingers landing on concrete. He had done it without thinking. That was the part he couldn't get past, not that he had done it, but that it had been so completely unconsidered. He had reached for the money clip the way you reach for your keys. Automatic, reflexive, like dropping money at someone's feet was a gesture his hands already knew how to make. What did that say about him? He wasn't sure he wanted to know tonight. He finished the scotch and went to bed and lay there with the ceiling, and Sarah Whitmore's voice saying, "I know you don't think of it as deciding I was worthless." And that was when he understood the real precision of what she'd said, because she hadn't said, "You decided I was worthless." She'd said, "You don't think of it as that," which was different, which was actually more accurate, because the truth was, he hadn't thought of it as anything at all, and that not malice. But the complete absence of consideration was exactly the thing she'd been pointing at. I was still awake at 2 in the morning. He was still thinking about her at 6 when he got up and made coffee and stood at his kitchen window and watched the early light come up over the neighborhood. His phone rang at 7:45. It was Brett. "I want to talk about last night," Brett said. No preamble. "Go ahead," Nathan said. "Not like this. Come into our offices, 10 o'clock. "Brett, the Hendricks deal is solid. Whatever you think happened." 10 o'clock, Nathan. Brett's voice had none of the warmth of the dinner table, none of the easy rapport of 12 months of partnership. It was flat and professional, and it said everything without saying anything. "Come in." The call ended. Nathan put his phone down and looked at his coffee and thought about what Cole Whitmore had said. "I want that to cost you something." It was costing him. He just didn't know yet how much. The morning moved fast after that, in the way mornings move when you're bracing for something and time refuses to slow down to give you room to prepare. He drove to Brett's firm. He sat in the waiting area for 9 minutes, he counted, before Brett's assistant showed him into the conference room. Brett was there, so was the firm's senior partner, a man named Walsh, who was 62 and who had built a real estate investment portfolio that made Nathan's operation look like a starter kit. Walsh had not been at dinner the night before, but he had clearly been briefed. "Sit down," Walsh said. Nathan sat. Walsh didn't waste time. "I've been in this business for 34 years. I've worked with 300 different developers, operators, and deal makers. I have seen every kind of difficult behavior that money produces in people, and I've learned to factor it into the equation." He folded his hands on the table. "What I won't factor in is a man who treats a stranger like she's disposable and then has a motorcycle club show up at a business dinner because of it. That's not what—" "I'm not done," Walsh said it calmly. "I don't care about the motorcycle club. I care about the behavior that produced the motorcycle club showing up. I care about the fact that Gregory Foss, who I have known for 20 years and who does not rattle, texted me at 11 o'clock last night to say that he was reassessing his confidence in the partnership." He looked at Nathan steadily. "Gregory Foss does not text at 11 o'clock. That tells me something happened last night that was not small." Nathan was quiet. "The Hendricks deal is good paper," Walsh said. "The fundamentals are solid. We're not walking away from the money because you had a bad moment at a gas station." He paused. "But I am putting you on notice personally that the way you conduct yourself outside this office is directly relevant to how we conduct business inside it. That's not a threat. That's just honesty." He stood up. "Brett will handle the next phase of the Hendricks conversation. I'll be in the background." He picked up his folder. "And Nathan," he stopped at the door, "call Gregory." He left. Brett looked at Nathan across the table. "I did some reading last night," Brett said. He said it almost apologetically, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it with satisfaction. "Sarah Whitmore. She runs the volunteer coordination at the Willowbrook Community Center. Has for 8 years. She also does private outreach, people who need help but don't know how to ask for it. Elderly residents, people going through loss, that kind of thing." He paused. "The woman she was with yesterday morning, Dolores Vega. Her husband passed 6 weeks ago. She has no family in the state. Sarah's been visiting her twice a week." Nathan said nothing. She wasn't coming from shopping, Brett said. She wasn't coming from lunch. She was coming from spending her afternoon with a widow who had nobody else. I didn't know that. No, Brett looked at him. That's what she told you at the restaurant, though, that you decided before you knew. I know what she told me. I'm just saying she was right. The silence that followed was the most expensive silence Nathan Caldwell had sat in since the early days of his business, when he'd had to sit across from a banker who was deciding whether to extend his credit line, and everything had hinged on the next 2 minutes. What do I do? He said. Brett seemed genuinely surprised by the question. He had expected defensiveness. He had expected repositioning. He'd spent the drive in that morning preparing for Nathan's version of what had happened, the version where Nathan was reasonable and the situation was mischaracterized. He hadn't prepared for this. I don't know, Brett said honestly. I think that's something you have to figure out yourself. Nathan drove back to his office and sat at his desk and did not open his laptop. He sat there 20 minutes, which was the longest Nathan Caldwell had sat without working in years. And he thought about a woman in a flannel shirt who had sat at his dinner table not to perform anything, not to impress anyone, but to say something that needed to be said, and then left. He picked up his phone. He called Gregory. Gregory answered on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, Gregory said. You could have called me, Nathan said. No, Gregory's voice was quiet. I couldn't. Not last night. Not yet. What does that mean? It means I needed to sleep on whether I had anything useful to say to you. A pause. I've known you for 12 years, Nathan. I've watched you make money and make decisions, and I've respected both. I've also watched you walk past people in a way that I told myself was just efficiency. Just focus. Another pause. Last night I realized I'd been rationalizing something I shouldn't have been rationalizing. Nathan sat with that. What she said at the table, Gregory continued, about deciding before knowing. You do that, Nathan. You've always done that. I've watched you do it with employees, with vendors, with anyone who comes in the wrong car or the wrong clothes. Gregory's voice was steady, not unkind. I told myself it was just how you were. Last night I saw it from the outside for the first time, through her eyes, and it looked different from out there. I know, Nathan said. Gregory was quiet for a moment. Do you? Yeah. Nathan pressed his hand flat on the desk. I do. What are you going to do about it? I don't know yet, Nathan said, but I'm going to do something. He hung up. He sat. And then doing something that Nathan Caldwell never did, that his assistant had never seen him do in 4 years of working for him, that Gregory Foss would not have believed possible before last night. He picked up his phone, opened a browser, and searched for the Willowbrook Community Center. He found their donation page. He found their contact form. He sat there with both open, not sure which one was the right thing, not sure if either of them was enough, not sure if anything he did from this side of it would translate into anything real on the other side. Then he thought about Dolores Vega, who had no family in the state, who had been visited twice a week by a woman who didn't have to do it, and something shifted in his chest that he didn't have a name for yet, but that he recognized as being unfamiliar in a way that was significant. He filled out the donation form, a substantial amount. He didn't do it to balance anything. He did it because it was the most direct action available to him, and because sitting still was no longer possible. Then he put his phone down and opened his laptop and went back to work, because that was what he knew how to do. And because some things don't resolve in a day, and because the specific weight Gregory had described, the weight of a reckoning that was just beginning to settle, was going to take more than a morning to understand. He knew that. For the first time in a long time, Nathan Caldwell was okay with not knowing how long something was going to take. That was something. It wasn't enough, but it was something. And 30 miles away, in a house with a garden that had sunflowers that had no practical purpose, Sarah Whitmore was already up, already dressed, or already on the phone with a woman named Patricia, whose landlord had changed the locks while she was at work, already moving through her day with the same unremarkable, relentless, quiet commitment that she had brought to every day for years. She had told Cole about the dinner before they went to sleep. Not the entire debrief, they had done that in the kitchen over tea, but the final thought, the one she wanted him to hold with her. I don't know if it changed anything, she had said. In him, I mean. I don't know if he's going to be different. You don't need him to be different, Coley had said. I know, but I want him to be. She had been quiet for a moment. Not for me, for the next person he meets at a gas pump. Cole had looked at her in that way he had, the way that was equal parts respect and love, in the particular brand of warmth that comes from knowing someone so thoroughly that you no longer have to translate them. "That's why I married you," he had said. She had rolled her eyes at him, which was her way of receiving a compliment that was too true to be deflected with anything else. Now in the morning light, she was listening to Patricia describe a landlord who had decided that the law was optional when you were dealing with a single mother who didn't know her rights. Sarah had her notepad out. She was writing down everything. When Patricia paused to breathe, Sarah said, "I know a housing attorney who does pro bono work on Thursdays. His name is Derek. I'm going to text you his number right now. You call him before noon." "What if he can't help?" "He can help. Call him before noon." She texted the number, made a note to follow up with Patricia that afternoon. Circled Thursday on her calendar in case Patricia needed someone to go to the appointment with her. She put the phone down and picked up her coffee. Cole was in the kitchen doorway. "Patricia," he said, "a lockout situation." She called Derek. "She will." Sarah looked up at him. "You heading out?" "Meeting at the clubhouse. Richie has something." He paused. "You want to know about it?" She considered. "Is it something I need to know about?" "Not yet." "Then no." She went back to her notepad. "Tell me if it becomes something." He kissed the top of her head on his way past. She reached up and caught his hand for half a second before letting it go. He grabbed his jacket. She heard the front door open and close. She heard his bike start. She listened to it pull out and fade down the street, and then she went back to her list, which had 7 names on it, in which she was already prioritizing by urgency because that was how Sarah Whitmore moved through the world, one person at a time, in an order of who needed her most without fanfare, without the expectation of recognition, without any of the calculation that Nathan Caldwell applied to every interaction in his life. She was already thinking about the next name on the list when her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the community center's donation system. An anonymous donation had been processed to the general fund. The amount made her stop. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at the notation field where donors could leave an optional message. Most people left nothing. A few left names. A few left Bible verses or short notes. This one said, "For the work that gets done without an audience." Sarah put the phone down on the kitchen table. She sat with that for a long moment. She didn't know for certain that it was him. She told herself she didn't know, but she sat there with the notification in front of her and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction exactly, not vindication, but something quieter and more complicated that sat somewhere between hope and grief. Hope because maybe something had landed. Grief because it should have been simpler than this. Because the distance between that parking lot and this kitchen table should not have required a motorcycle club and a restaurant confrontation and a sleepless night to cross. She thought about all the women who hadn't had a Cole, who had stood at that same gas pump in that same moment and had nobody riding toward the meridian on their behalf, who had cried on the side of the road and then driven home and made dinner and let it go because there was nothing else to do with it. She thought about those women for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the next name on her list. Richie, meanwhile, had laid out something on the table at the clubhouse that changed the shape of the morning. Cole had come in and poured his coffee and sat down, and Richie had pushed a folder across the table without ceremony, which was how Richie delivered everything without ceremony, because ceremony was for people who weren't sure of the weight of what they were carrying. "Caldwell's been doing this for a while," Richie said. Cole opened the folder. The first page was a city council record. A rezoning application 3 years old for a block on the east side of town that had previously been zoned residential. The application had been approved. 12 families had moved out in the 6 months following the approval. The record showed that Nathan Caldwell's company had purchased 4 of the affected properties within 30 days of the rezoning being finalized. "How did the rezoning go through?" Cole asked. "Fast," Richie said. "Unusually fast. 3 of the council members who voted for it received campaign contributions from entities connected to Caldwell in the 12 months before the vote." Cole turned to the next page. It was a complaint record from the County Labor Board, an employee grievance filed 18 months ago by a woman named Teresa Ochoa, who had worked as an administrative assistant at Caldwell Property Group for 4 years. The complaint described a pattern of treatment, dismissal of concerns, punitive schedule changes after she raised an issue about unpaid overtime, a comment her supervisor had made that referenced her immigration status. The complaint had been settled. The settlement amount was redacted. Teresa Ochoa no longer worked at Caldwell Property Group. Cole looked up at Richie. "There's more," Richie said. There was more. There was a contractor dispute a small landscaping company owned by a man named Vernon Price who had done work for one of Caldwell's developments and had been paid 60 cents on the dollar after a dispute over completion standards that 3 independent assessors had later determined were met. Vernon Price had tried to pursue it through small claims court. The case had been tied up long enough that Vernon's company had closed before it was resolved. There was a code violation on one of the development sites, a safety issue that had been flagged by an inspector, and that had sat unresolved for 11 weeks while Caldwell's legal team filed a challenge to the inspector's methodology. The inspector had subsequently been reassigned. There was a review on a community feedback board posted 18 months ago by a woman who identified herself only as a former employee that said, "This man treats people like they are tools. When a tool is no longer useful, he throws it away. He has never once looked at a person and thought about what their life is like outside of what they can do for him." Cole read that one twice. "Why didn't any of this surface before?" Cole asked. Richie made a face. "It did, locally, but it surfaces in places Nathan Caldwell doesn't have to look at. Labor board records, small claims courts, community boards. He moves fast enough and his legal team is good enough that nothing gets traction before he's already on to the next thing." Cole set the folder down. He was quiet for a moment. "Does Sarah know about this?" asked a man named Decker, who was sitting at the far end of the table with his arms crossed and the expression he always had when he was thinking 3 steps ahead of the conversation. "No," Cole said. "You going to tell her when it's the right time?" Decker nodded slowly. "And what are we going to do with it?" Cole looked at the folder, at Teresa Ochoa's complaint, at Vernon Price's closed business, at the families who had moved out of the East Side block. "First thing," Cole said, "is that none of this stays in this folder." He looked at Richie. Richie understood immediately. "Reporter, the woman at the Courier, Maggie Torres." "She's good," Richie said. "She's thorough," Cole said, "which is better." He picked up his coffee. "She's been looking for something to do with Nathan Caldwell for 2 years. Every time she gets close, he moves a piece and the story changes shape." Cole looked at Richie steadily. "Give her the shape." Richie reached across and took the folder back. He would make copies. He would call Maggie Torres. He would do all of it with the particular efficiency that made him useful in exactly this kind of situation. Cole took his coffee and walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot where his bike sat in the morning light. "I thought about Sarah at the kitchen table last night, explaining what she had said to Nathan in the restaurant. He thought about the precision of it, not because he taught her that precision, but because she had come to it herself through a life of paying attention to what actually happened when you said real things to people versus the things you were supposed to say. He thought about Teresa Ochoa, who had filed a complaint that was settled and redacted and disappeared. I thought about Vernon Price, whose business was gone. He thought about the 12 families from the East Side block. None of them had had a Cole. None of them had had a clubhouse full of people who could make phone calls and find records and contact reporters. They'd had the same tools that most people have: official channels, complaint forms, court processes, and those tools had been slower than Nathan Caldwell's money. That wasn't acceptable. It also wasn't something Cole could solve with another restaurant visit. This required something slower and more permanent. This required Maggie Torres in the city council records and Vernon Price being willing to talk on the record, and Teresa Ochoa, if she was willing, and only if she was willing, putting her name to what she'd filed. This required the kind of accountability that didn't resolve in a day. Cole understood that. He was a patient man when patience was the right tool. He turned back to the table. "Second thing," he said. Decker looked up. "Vernon Price, does he still want to do landscaping?" Decker frowned. "I don't know. Why?" "Because the chapter has 3 properties that need grounds maintenance, and we've been using a company out of the next county because nobody local has approached us." Cole set his coffee down. "Find Vernon Price. Tell him we'd like a bid." Decker uncrossed his arms. He looked at Cole for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but the particular recognition of a man seeing another man do something he respects. "Yeah," Decker said. "Okay." And Richie looked up from his notes. "Teresa Ochoa, don't approach her directly, but find out if she's got representation. If she sold for less than she was owed and signed something that wasn't enforceable, which those settlements usually aren't, she might have options she doesn't know about. Cole picked up his jacket. Find out. Richie wrote it down. Cole put his jacket on and walked toward the door. Cole, said Decker. Cole stopped. This is about more than the gas pump now. It was always about more than the gas pump, Cole said. He pushed the door open. The gas pump was just the first time it was personal. He got on his bike. He was halfway home when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled over and checked it, a habit Sarah had drilled into him. With the same quiet persistence she applied to everything else, because pulling over to check your phone is how you don't end up in the ditch, Cole. The text was from Sarah. It said, someone made an anonymous donation to the center. Substantial one. Left a note that said, for the work that gets done without an audience. A second text, I think I know who it was. A third text 30 seconds later, don't say anything. I just wanted you to know. Cole read it 3 times. Then he put his phone away and pulled back onto the road. He had been doing this long enough, this particular life, this particular combination of brotherhood and family, and the specific justice that lived in the gray spaces between what the law could do and what was actually right, to know that moments like these were rare. Moments where something that started as cruelty turned, through a series of choices made by real people in real time, into something that resembled accountability. Not resolution, not yet, but the beginning of it. That evening, Cole came home to find Sarah at the kitchen table with her notepad and her phone and a mug of tea, already working through the end of her day. Patricia had called Derek. Derek had agreed to take the case. The landlord had been notified that he was in violation of tenant protection law and had 24 hours to restore access. Sarah told Cole this while she was still writing a note on her pad, not looking up the way she told him things that mattered, but that she had already processed efficiently, moving through the information, because the information had been converted into action and the action was in motion. Patricia, okay, he said. She cried when she called me back. Happy crying. Sarah looked up. The good kind. Good. She studied his face. You found something in at the clubhouse. Yeah. Is it bad? It's real, Cole said. Which is different. She waited. Caldwell has a pattern, Cole said. He sat down across from her. The gas pump wasn't a bad day. It's how he moves through the world. There are people who lost businesses, workers who filed complaints that went nowhere, families who got priced out. He paused. It's more than one afternoon. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? She asked. What needs to be done? He said, carefully. She looked at him. How carefully? Maggie Torres carefully. Sarah absorbed that. Maggie Torres had broken 3 stories in 2 years that had resulted in actual change: a county procurement scandal, a school board cover-up, a nursing home operator who had been billing for services not rendered. She was methodical. She was patient. She was not someone who ran a story until she could prove every sentence. Okay, Sarah said. It might take a while, Cole said. Months, maybe more. I know. And it might not end cleanly. Nothing ends cleanly, Sarah said. She looked back at her notepad. That's not the point. Cole nodded. They sat there in the kitchen together, the quiet between them, the kind of quiet that married people build over years. Not the absence of words, but the presence of understanding, the specific ease of 2 people who know each other well enough to share silence without filling it. Outside, the night was coming in. Somewhere across town, in an office that overlooked a city he had shaped according to his own priorities, Nathan Caldwell was reading through a file his assistant had left on his desk. It was the Hendricks parcel project plan, the next phase, the groundbreaking schedule, the timelines that had seemed just yesterday morning like the clearest possible evidence that his life was going exactly where he'd steered it. He read through it, made notes in the margins the way he always did, identified 3 decisions that needed to be made by end of week. And then he sat back and thought about a folder that didn't exist yet in a clubhouse he had never been in, with a reporter's name on a piece of paper that would eventually land on her desk. He didn't know about the folder yet. He didn't know about Maggie Torres. I didn't know that Richie had already made a call, or that Vernon Price had answered, or that Teresa Ochoa had a lawyer friend who had read her settlement agreement and found 2 clauses that were not enforceable under state law. He didn't know any of that, but Nathan Caldwell was a man who understood better than most how things accumulated. How one small decision led to another. How what you thought was contained had a way of expanding until it filled every room. He sat at his desk and he knew without knowing the specifics that something had been set in motion. He had set it in motion himself. At a gas pump on Route 9 on an ordinary afternoon with money he'd dropped on the ground without thinking. Maggie Torres had a rule she'd kept for 11 years of reporting: never call a source twice in 1 week unless you were ready to publish. It told them the story was real. It told them you were serious. It also told them in ways they couldn't quite name, but always felt that the window for getting ahead of it had closed. She called Nathan Caldwell on a Wednesday. She had spent 6 weeks before that call doing what she always did, building the architecture before she touched the walls. She had the city council records. She had the rezoning timeline. She had the campaign contribution disclosures cross-referenced against the vote dates with 3 independent sources who confirmed the pattern. She had Vernon Price on the record, not angry, not bitter, just precise. A man who had built a small business over 9 years and watched it close in one because a payment dispute had been weaponized into a legal delay that he didn't have the reserves to outlast. She had 2 former Caldwell Property Group employees who had agreed to be named. She did not yet have Teresa Ochoa, and she wasn't going to push for her because Maggie Torres understood the particular courage required of someone who had signed a settlement and was being asked to revisit it, and she respected that courage enough not to rush it. She called Nathan Caldwell at 10 in the morning. His assistant answered and said Mr. Caldwell was in a meeting and could she take a message. Maggie said, "Tell him it's Maggie Torres from the Courier and that I'm working on a story about Caldwell Property Group's development practices over the past 4 years, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to include his perspective before we go to print." There was a pause on the line. "I'll give him the message," the assistant said. Nathan called back in 11 minutes. "Ms. Torres," he said. He had his business voice on controlled, slightly warmed the register he used for situations that required management. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for calling back quickly. You said you were working on a story." "I am. I've been working on it for about 6 weeks. I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond before we publish." "A beat. What's the story?" "It covers several things," Maggie said. She was at her desk with her notes open, but she didn't need them. She had it memorized. The East Side rezoning from 3 years ago and the timeline of property acquisitions that followed the vote. The campaign contributions made to council members in the 12 months preceding that vote. A pattern of contract disputes with smaller vendors. I've spoken with Vernon Price at length, and he's agreed to be quoted. 2 former employees who describe a workplace environment that I think your investors and partners would want to understand better. She paused. And the broader question of whether there's a systemic approach at Caldwell Property Group to leverage legal and financial resources in ways that disadvantage people who don't have equivalent access to those resources. The silence on Nathan's end was 7 seconds. Maggie counted. "I'd like to have my attorney review the—" "Of course," she said. "I'm not publishing until next week. You have until Friday at 5 to provide a statement or request a conversation. I'm available anytime before then." "Who gave you this?" Maggie said nothing. "Ms. Torres, I'm asking who—" "I'm not going to answer that," she said not unkindly. "You know I'm not going to answer that." Another silence, shorter this time. "I'll call you before Friday," Nathan said. "I'll be here," Maggie said. She hung up. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the window for a moment at the street 3 floors below, where people moved through their Wednesday morning without any awareness of the story that was about to land in their city. She thought about Sarah Whitmore. She had read the description Richie had given her, had looked up the community center page, had seen the photograph of Sarah at a food drive 3 winters ago. Arms full of coats, laughing at something someone off camera had said, completely unself-conscious, completely present. Maggie had not included Sarah in the story. This wasn't Sarah's story to be exposed in. This was Nathan Caldwell's story to be accountable for. But she thought about her anyway. She thought about what it meant that a woman who spent her life showing up for strangers had been made to feel worthless at a gas pump by a man whose entire operation was built on the calculated disadvantaging of people without resources, and that those 2 facts, the gas pump moment and the pattern Maggie had documented, were not separate. They were the same thing expressed at different scales. She made a note in her file: consistent. Not an aberration. Scale reveals character. Then she went back to work. Nathan's call to his attorney lasted 40 minutes. His attorney's name was Richard Fell, and Richard Fell had been keeping Nathan Caldwell's decisions insulated from their consequences for 8 years, which was a service Nathan paid generously for and had come to regard as a structural feature of his operation rather than an emergency measure. This conversation felt different. "How much does she have?" Richard asked. Nathan told him what she'd listed. Richard was quiet for a moment. "The contribution records are public. She could have built that from public records alone, no source required." Vernon Price is talking. Vernon Price settled. "The settlement didn't include a non-disclosure," Nathan said, because he remembered that specifically remembered being annoyed at the time that the amount was small enough that Richard hadn't thought a full NDA was worth the friction it might cause. Richard remembered it too. There was a pause that told Nathan he was remembering it. "The employees," Nathan said, "2 of them. Named." She said they agreed to be quoted. "Past performance. I don't know who they are yet." Richard exhaled, nodded dramatically, just the particular exhale of a man recalculating. "Okay, here's where we are. She has public records, a named vendor, and 2 former employees. That's a story. Whether it's a legally actionable story is a different question, but it's a story regardless." He paused. "The question is what you want to do. What are my options? You respond and contextualize. You decline to respond, or," Richard paused, "you get ahead of it." "What does getting ahead of it look like?" "It looks like you being the one who tells the story first. An op-ed, a public statement, something that acknowledges mistakes in process without admitting legal liability, that demonstrates awareness and course correction." Richard's voice was even professional. "It looks like you being a person before she makes you a subject." Nathan sat with that. "The rezoning," Nathan said, "the contributions. Were they legal?" "Yes." "Then contextualize them, explain the timeline. Make the case that it was business logic, not coordination." Richard paused. "Nathan, I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "Was it coordination?" "A beat. It was good timing," Nathan said. Richard was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted slightly, not coldly, but with the particular care of a man who needs the answer he gets to be accurate. "I need you to think carefully about what you just said and tell me if that's the complete truth." Nathan stared at his desk. 3 years ago, there had been a dinner. Not at the Meridian, somewhere smaller, more private, a place chosen specifically because it was not the kind of place people wrote about. A dinner with 2 men whose names appeared on the campaign contribution records and whose votes had appeared in the rezoning approval. Nathan had not asked for anything specific at that dinner. Nothing had been said specifically, but he had been very clear, in the way sophisticated men are clear without being explicit about what he was hoping the business climate in the east side of the county would look like in the coming years. "It was good timing," Nathan said again. Richard understood what that meant. He had been doing this for a long time. "Okay," Richard said, "then we're very careful. We contextualize, we don't elaborate, and we do not volunteer anything that isn't in her story already." He paused. "And Nathan, the employee situations. Is there anything else she might find?" Nathan thought of Teresa Ochoa. He thought of the comment about her immigration status that her supervisor had made, which Nathan had heard about secondhand and had not addressed because addressing it would have required acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would have required a conversation he hadn't wanted to have. "There might be more," Nathan said. Richard exhaled again. "Tell me," he told him. Richard was quiet for a longer time after that. "Call me back in an hour," Richard said finally. "I need to think." Nathan put his phone down. His office was quiet. His assistant had stopped appearing in the doorway with updates, which meant she was aware in the way good assistants are always aware that the temperature of the room had changed, and the wisest thing she could do was give him space. He turned his chair to face the window. He had built this view, deliberately had chosen this office specifically for the angle it gave him on the city, the particular vantage point that let him see 4 of his development projects from a single window. He had sat here 100 times looking at that view and felt the satisfaction of someone who had built something visible, something that you could point to and say that exists because I made it happen. He looked at it now and felt something he didn't have a word for yet. Not shame, not exactly. Something adjacent to it but colder. The specific discomfort of a man who has confused the evidence of his capability with the evidence of his worth and who is being asked for what may be the first time to separate those two things. His phone buzzed. A text from Gregory. Heard you got a call from the courier. You should have told me before I found out from Henderson. Nathan typed back, I know, I'm sorry. He had not said I'm sorry to Gregory in 12 years of partnership. He wasn't sure he'd meant it this clearly and longer than that. Gregory's response came after a minute. Call me after you talk to Richard. Nathan set the phone down and looked at the city and tried to figure out when exactly the machinery of his life had stopped being something he controlled and had become something that was running him. I thought it might have been a long time ago. He thought the gas pump might have simply been the first moment someone had been in a position to show him the machine from the outside. Richie found out about the courier story the same afternoon because Richie found out about everything and he told Cole that evening at the clubhouse. Cole listened without expression. She moving fast? Cole asked. Publishing next week, Richie said. She's thorough. She's had it for 6 weeks. Vernon talked to her. Yes, and 2 employees. She's got the contribution records. Cole nodded slowly. Teresa, he asked. Not yet, but Richie hesitated. Her friend, the lawyer who looked at the settlement, he says there are grounds, real grounds, if she wants to pursue it. Is she going to? Richie shrugged. Don't know. That's hers to decide. Nobody pushes her, Cole said. That's clear. Clear, Richie confirmed. Cole was quiet for a moment. He thought about what Sarah had said months ago now when he'd told her about the pattern Richie had found. She had listened to all of it, the rezoning, the contributions, Vernon Price, Teresa Ochoa, and she had been quiet for a long time, and then she had said something he hadn't expected. She had said, I feel guilty. He had looked at her. Why? Because this started because of what happened to me. And what happened to me was one afternoon. What happened to these other people was years. And somehow my afternoon is the thing that moved it. Cole had thought about that carefully before he answered. Your afternoon is the thing that made it visible, he said. The rest was already there. I know, but they deserved this sooner. Yeah, he had said. They did. I thought about that now, sitting in the clubhouse with Richie's information in front of him, and he thought about what it meant that justice was not a steady river, but a series of moments, specific, contingent, dependent on who happened to be in the right place with the right capacity to do something with what they saw. Sarah had been at that gas pump. He had been home when she got back. Richie had contacts at the county office. Maggie Torres had been building a file for 2 years that she hadn't been able to finish. Every single one of those things had to be true simultaneously. That was what made it rare. And that was what made him careful not to think of it as the system working. The system hadn't worked. A collection of specific people had made specific choices. That was different. He called Sarah on his way home. Maggie's publishing next week, he said when she answered. A pause. Does she have enough? Richie thinks yes. Another pause. Longer. How's it going to land? Don't know yet, Cole said. Depends on how much the city wants to pay attention. Sarah was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing. He could hear in the background the faint sound of the radio, the Spanish language gospel station that came in most clearly on the kitchen radio, which she had started leaving on in the afternoons because she said it made the house feel less empty when he was out. Cole, yeah, whatever happens with the story with Nathan, with all of it, I need you to know that I would have gone back to that restaurant even if none of the rest of it existed. She paused. Even if he was just a rude man at a pump with no pattern, no history, nothing. I still needed to say what I said. I know that, Cole said. I don't want the story to make it feel like it was about strategy, like she searched for the word maneuvering. It wasn't strategy, Cole said. It was yours first. Everything else came after. Okay, she said. Okay. He heard her exhale. Come home, she said. 20 minutes, he said. The story ran on Thursday morning. Maggie Torres had spent the 2 days between her call to Nathan and the publication date doing what she always did in the final stretch. Reading everything she'd written 3 more times, fact-checking every claim against every source, removing anything she couldn't support, with at least 2 independent confirmations. She had included Nathan's statement, which Richard Fell had drafted, and which said the appropriate things about contextual factors in business practices, consistent with industry standards and ongoing commitment to ethical development, language that acknowledged nothing and explained everything and satisfied no one. She had written her story plainly. No dramatic framing, no loaded language, Just the timeline, the records, the quotes, and the pattern they formed when you placed them side by side. She had let the facts perform the function that facts perform when they're accurate and sequenced correctly. The story went live at 6 in the morning. By 9, it had been shared 300 times. By noon, it had been read by most of the city council. By 2 in the afternoon, the councilman, whose name appeared most prominently in the contribution records, had issued a statement saying he would be requesting an independent review of the rezoning process. By 4, Vernon Price had received 2 phone calls from contractors who had read the story and wanted to know if he was interested in talking about new work. By 5:30, Nathan Caldwell's publicist had issued a second statement on his behalf, this one noticeably less polished than Richard Fell's draft. This one containing the word accountability 3 times, which told anyone who knew how these statements worked that someone had panicked in the final hour. Gregory Foss read the story at 7 in the morning before the call started while it was still quiet. He read it at his kitchen table with his coffee, the way he read everything important slowly and full without skimming. When he was done, he sat there for a long time. Then he called Nathan. Nathan answered immediately. "You read it," Nathan said. "Yes." "And it's accurate," Gregory said. He said it without judgment, but the absence of judgment in his voice was its own kind of weight. Nathan said nothing. "Nathan." Gregory's voice shifted, became something more direct, more personal than their usual register. "I need to ask you something and I need a real answer." "Okay." "The dinner. 3 years ago, the one before the rezoning vote." A long beat. "Gregory, I need the real answer." Another beat. Longer. "It wasn't nothing," Nathan said. Gregory absorbed that. "Okay," he said quietly. "Gregory, I need some time," Gregory said. "Going anywhere. The business isn't going anywhere, but I need some time." "I understand." "I don't think you do," Gregory said. "Not fully. Not yet." His voice wasn't angry. It was something quieter and more final. "I trusted your word for 12 years. I built things on your word. And I found out from a newspaper that your word had gaps in it." He paused. "That's not a small thing." "I know," Nathan said. "Call me next week," Gregory said. "Give me the week." He hung up. Nathan put his phone down and sat with what remained. His assistant appeared in the doorway. She had a list of calls that had come in since 6 that morning. Reporters, council members, 2 investors who were not Gregory, 1 investor who was. She stood there with the list in the particular expression of someone who is very good at their job and is currently unsure whether their job still exists in the form it did yesterday. "Hold them all," Nathan said. She nodded and stepped back. He looked at the window. "I thought about a man named Vernon Price who had built something over 9 years and watched it close in 1. He thought about Teresa Ochoa, whose name he had known for 18 months and whose complaint he had managed rather than resolved. He thought about 12 families on the east side who had moved out of their neighborhood in the 6 months after a vote that he had, the word came clearly, now finally without the cushioning of legal language influenced. He had not thought of himself as someone who harmed people. He had thought of himself as someone who moved efficiently, who made hard decisions, who understood that progress required trade-offs, and that not everyone would benefit equally from every deal. He had built a story about himself in which he was the protagonist of his own ambition, and the people in his way were simply the friction that ambition had to move through. He saw now how that story had worked. He saw the architecture of it, the way it had been constructed, specifically to prevent him from having to look at what the friction was made of. It was made of people. Vernon Price was a person. Teresa Ochoa was a person. Dolores Vega, whom Sarah had spent a Tuesday helping, was a person. The 12 families were people. He had known that technically. He had just never made it real. Sarah Whitmore had made it real. She had sat at his table in her flannel shirt and made one afternoon at a gas pump into something that required him to feel the weight of it. And in doing so, she had cracked something open that had let in enough light for him to see the shit ape of what lived underneath. He picked up his phone. I didn't call Richard. He didn't call his publicist. He didn't call any of the investors or the councilman or anyone who was currently managing the operational fallout of the morning. He called the Willowbrook Community Center. A woman answered, not Sarah, a volunteer named Diana who handled the front desk on Thursdays. "I'd like to speak with Sarah Whitmore," Nathan said. "My name is Nathan Caldwell." A pause on the line. "Can I ask what this is regarding?" Nathan thought about how to answer that. He thought about all the language available to him, the professional language, the strategic language, the careful language. He had used his whole career to say things that meant something smaller than they appeared to mean. I want to apologize, he said, directly, without an attorney present. Another pause. Hold on, Diana said. He was on hold for 4 minutes. He sat with the hold music, which was a local radio station playing a country song he didn't recognize, and he waited. This is Sarah. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it from the restaurant, clear present, without performance. Ms. Whitmore, he said. Nathan Caldwell. I know, she said. I read the story this morning. So did I. I wasn't sure what he'd expected her to say. Probably nothing this direct, nothing this simple. He had expected guardedness. He had expected the particular caution of someone who had been through something and was waiting to see if the man on the other end of the phone was still who they'd experienced or had become someone different now that there were consequences. I'm sorry, he said. She was quiet. I'm not calling because of the story, he said quickly. I want to be clear about that. The story is what it is, and what it is accurate, and I'm not calling to manage that. He stopped. Tried again. I'm calling because I've been thinking about what you said at the restaurant, about deciding before knowing. He paused. You were right, and I've spent the last 3 months understanding how right you were and not just about the gas pump. Sarah said nothing for a moment. Mr. Caldwell, she said finally. Nathan. Nathan. She seemed to consider that. I appreciate you calling. I mean that. A pause. But I want to ask you something. Okay. What are you going to do? He understood immediately what she meant. Not what are you going to do about the story, not what are you going to do about Gregory or the investors or the council review. What are you going to do about the thing underneath all of it, the pattern, the people, the specific harm that had accumulated over years of treating human beings as friction? I don't have a complete answer, he said. That's okay, she said. An incomplete answer that's honest is better than a complete one that isn't. He almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was precise and precision in the mouth of someone speaking without preparation. Always caught him off guard. Vernon Price, he said, I want to make that right, not settle it, actually make it right. That's between you and Vernon Price. I know, but I'm telling you because, he paused, because you're the reason I'm saying it out loud. And I think saying it out loud to someone who will hold you to it is how you make sure you actually do it. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You should say it to Vernon Price, she said, not to Mewasi. I'm going to. Then do that. A pause. And the others. I know. The families from the east side. I know, he said again, and he did know. He was under no illusion that a phone call and a donation and a conversation with Vernon Price was the complete accounting. He was under no illusion that any of this resolved cleanly. But he was beginning to understand the shape of what accountability actually looked like, as opposed to what it was performed as, and the difference was enormous. You called this number, Sarah said, without an attorney, on a day when every person in your professional life probably told you to lock down and say nothing. Yes. Waipunam, he thought about it. He had thought about it the entire time he was on hold. Because the managed version of this, he said, the statement and the publicist and the contextualizing, that's what I would have done yesterday. And yesterday I was a different person than I was at the gas pump, but only in degree, not in kind. He paused. I don't want to be the managed version of myself anymore. I don't know yet what the other version looks like, but it starts with calling without an attorney. Sarah sat with that for a moment. Okay, she said, not warmly, not coldly, just okay. An acknowledgement that was also a challenge. That said, I heard you, and now let's see. Thank you for answering, Nathan said. Thank you for calling, she said. She hung up. She put the phone down on the front desk. Diana was watching her from across the room with undisguised curiosity, and she stood there for a moment with her hand on the phone. She didn't know what Nathan Caldwell would do. She didn't know if the call meant anything beyond the day it was made. She didn't know if Vernon Price would get what he was owed, or if the council review would find what was there to find, or if Teresa Ochoa would decide she wanted to go further with what she had. She didn't know any of it. But she knew that a man who had dropped money on the ground and watched to see if she'd pick it up had just called her without an attorney and said something he didn't have to say. That wasn't the end of anything, but it wasn't nothing either. She picked up her notepad. She went back to work. Vernon Price answered the door in a work shirt that still had dirt on the elbows from the morning, and when he saw Nathan Caldwell standing on the other side of it, he went completely still. Not frightened, not angry, just still the way a man goes still when something happens that he has played out in his head so many times that the actual moment of it arriving feels unreal. "Mr. Price," Nathan said. Vernon looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked past him at the car in the driveway, not the Mercedes, a different one, older, less conspicuous, and then back at Nathan's face. "You came yourself," Vernon said. "Yes." "No lawyer." "No." Vernon stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said, not warmly, not hostilely, just the particular flat courtesy of a man who was raised to let someone in when they came to your door, regardless of who they were. Nathan came in. The house was modest and well-kept, the kind of house that had been maintained carefully for years by someone who took care of things they owned. There were photographs on the wall, woman, two kids at various ages, what looked like a job site with Vernon in the middle of a crew grinning. Nathan noticed the photograph of the crew. He noticed how many people were in it. "Coffee?" Vernon asked. "If it's made." "It's always made." Vernon disappeared into the kitchen. Nathan stood in the living room and looked at the photograph of the crew. 9 men, a small landscaping company. 9 men's livelihoods built over 9 years by one man who had gotten up before sunrise every day and done the work. I thought about the legal delay that had outlasted Vernon's cash reserves. He thought about the fact that he had known somewhere in the back of his decision-making that delay was a tool, that time was a weapon when one side had more of it than the other. He had not thought of it consciously in those terms, but he had known it. That was worse than not knowing. Vernon came back with 2 mugs. He handed one to Nathan and sat in the chair across from the couch and waited. Nathan sat down. "I read the story," Vernon said. "So did a lot of people." "Yeah." Vernon wrapped both hands around his mug. "I want you to know something. I didn't talk to that reporter to hurt you." Nathan looked at him. "I talked to her because she asked the right questions," Vernon said. "And because I was tired of carrying something that wasn't mine to carry." He paused. "I did the work. I completed the job. 3 independent assessors said I completed it, and you buried that in paperwork until I ran out of money." He said it without heat, just as fact. "I want you to understand that I know you know that." "I know that," Nathan said. Vernon nodded, like he'd expected it, but hearing it said plainly still meant something. "My foreman," Vernon said. "Marcus, he had 3 kids. He was with me 7 years. When the company closed, he moved to his brother-in-law's place in Texas because there was no work here anymore." He looked at Nathan steadily. "I don't tell you that to make you feel guilty. I tell you because you should know what the paperwork cost, not in dollar terms, in human terms." Nathan held the mug in both hands and felt the weight of what Vernon was saying land without the cushioning of any professional distance. "What would make it right?" Nathan asked. "Not money," Vernon said immediately. "Then what?" Vernon looked at him for a long moment. "You know what I've been doing since the company closed?" "No." "Odd jobs, some consulting, helping my neighbor with his landscaping on weekends." He paused. "I've been keeping my hand in it because I still know how to do it, because I still love the work. But I don't have the capital to start again. And my credit took the hit from the closure, and the banks aren't interested in a man my age with that on his record." Nathan understood where this was going. "What would it take to start again?" Nathan asked. "More than I have." "How much more?" Vernon looked at him carefully. "Why are you asking?" "Because I want to know." "A beat. Starting right equipment insurance, the first 6 months of operating costs may be $40,000, Vernon said. He said it like he expected Nathan to laugh or to suddenly find the price too high or to produce some counteroffer that lowered it enough to make it meaningless. Nathan didn't do any of those things. "I'm not going to write you a check today," Nathan said, "because I don't want this to be a transaction. I don't want you to take something from me and feel like that means I'm cleared." He paused. "But I have a development site on the east side that's going into its landscaping phase in 6 weeks. The contract is worth more than $40,000. I want to offer it to your company." "I don't have a company." "You could." Vernon stared at him. "I'll pay the deposit on the contract up front," Nathan said. "Enough to cover your restart costs. The rest paid out in the normal schedule. You hire your crew, you do the work. You get paid what the work is worth. He held Vernon's eyes, not as a favor, as a contractor, because you're good at what you do and you were good at it before I took that from you and you're still good at it now. Vernon was quiet for a long time. And if I say no, he asked, then I've still said what I came to say, Nathan said, and you owe me nothing. Vernon looked at his coffee. He looked at the photograph of his crew on the wall. He looked at it for a long time like he was counting the faces. Marcus is in Texas, he said. If he wants to come back, I'm not making you a promise about Marcus. Vernon's voice was firm. That's not yours to offer. That's between me and Marcus. He looked back at Nathan. What I'm saying is that if I do this, if I start again, it won't be because you made it possible. It'll be because I was always going to start again. You'd just be getting out of the way of something that was going to happen eventually. Nathan sat with that. He sat with the precise recalibration of the gesture that Vernon had just performed, turning it from a gift into a step aside, which was exactly what it needed to be. That's a fair way to put it, Nathan said. Vernon nodded slowly. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. He drove away from Vernon's house with both hands on the wheel and nothing on the radio. He drove the long way back to his office, the route that took him past the East Side block. The block that had been rezoned 3 years ago. The block that had 12 families fewer than it had before. He drove slowly. He looked at it. He had driven past it 100 times without really seeing it because it was a future development site and he had filed it under assets in his mental ledger and stopped looking at it the way you look at a place where people live. He saw it now. He pulled over. He sat there for a moment with the engine running, looking at the block, at the houses that were still occupied, at the ones that were empty, at the particular geography of a neighborhood that had been partially hollowed out by the movement of money in a direction that only benefited one person. I thought about what he could do, not symbolically, practically. He thought about the development plan and whether it had to look the way it currently looked, and he was surprised to discover sitting there on the side of the road with no attorneys and no investors and no one to perform for that. There were things in the plan that could change, not the whole project, not the financial structure, but things within it that he had designed according to the logic of maximum extraction that could be redesigned according to different logic without destroying the deal. He picked up his phone and called his project architect. The East Side plan, Nathan said. I want to meet this week. I want to talk about the community access elements. We didn't include community access elements, the architect said. I know, Nathan said. That's what we need to talk about. He hung up. He looked at the block one more time. Then he put the car in drive and went back to his life, the life that was going to be for a long time. The uncomfortable and necessary work of building something different from the inside of what already existed. Maggie Torres published her follow-up story 3 weeks later. It was shorter than the first one. It ran under the headline, After Courier Report, Caldwell Meets with Affected Contractors and Pledges, Project Changes. It was not a redemption piece. Maggie Torres did not write redemption pieces because redemption was not something you declared. It was something you demonstrated over time, and time had not yet passed. It was simply an account of what had happened after the first story reported accurately, with Vernon Price quoted directly and Nathan's statement included in the council review still ongoing. Vernon Price said in his quote, "He came to my house, himself, no lawyer." That meant something. Whether it means enough, that's going to take longer to know. Maggie had read that quote back to Vernon 3 times to make sure it said exactly what he meant. It did. Teresa Ochoa called Richie on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 months after the first story ran. She hadn't planned to call. She had read both stories and had told herself it wasn't her business anymore, that she had settled that it was done. She had made breakfast and driven her daughter to school and gone to work at her new job, which was at a property management company where no one had ever said anything about her immigration status because it was nobody's business and also because she had been a citizen for 6 years. She had driven past a newsstand on the way home and seen the second story's headline on the front page of the Courier, and something had moved in her chest, not anger, which had been there before and had faded, but something older and quieter. A sense of something unresolved that she had packed away and that the sight of Nathan Caldwell's name had pulled loose. She had called Richie because she had her lawyer friend who had given her a number, and the number had led to Richie, and she had told herself she was just asking a question. The settlement, she said, my lawyer looked at it. I know, Richie said. He says 2 clauses aren't enforceable. I know that too. Silence on the line. I have a daughter, Teresa said. She's 8. She has no memory of any of this. Okay, Richie said carefully. I don't want to put her through something long, Teresa said. I don't want to be a story in the newspaper. I don't want to sit across from Nathan Caldwell in a room with lawyers. Then you don't have to. But I want him to know, she said. I want him to know what those years cost me. Not in court, not in the newspaper. Just I want him to know. Richie was quiet for a moment. I think that can be arranged, he said carefully, if that's what you want. Is he the kind of person who would hear it? Richie thought about the morning Cole had told him about Nathan going to Vernon Price's house. He thought about the phone call Sarah had described, the one without an attorney, the one that started with "I'm sorry" and didn't try to be anything more strategic than that. I think he's trying to be, Richie said. I can't promise more than that. Teresa was quiet for a long moment. Okay, she said. Set it up. Just the two of us. Neutral location, no lawyers. And if he says anything that sounds like it came from a lawyer, I'm walking out. Understood, Richie said. He called Cole. Cole called Sarah. Sarah said nothing for a moment, and then she said, "She's brave." Cole said, "Yeah." Sarah said, "Make sure she knows she doesn't have to do this." Cole said, "She knows." Sarah said, "Make sure anyway." The meeting between Nathan and Teresa happened on a Wednesday morning at a coffee shop on the north side of town that neither of them had been to before. Neutral as agreed. No lawyers, no witnesses, except the two of them and the ambient noise of a coffee shop at 9 in the morning. Teresa was already there when Nathan arrived. She was 34 with the particular composure of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say enough times that the performance of nervousness is no longer available to them. She had her coffee. She had her hands flat on the table. She looked at him when he came in without looking away. Nathan ordered his coffee at the counter. He brought it to the table. He sat down. "Ms. Ochoa," he said. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. And then immediately, because she had decided in the car on the way here that she was going to control the pace of this, "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to tell you something." "Okay," he said. "I worked for your company for 4 years," she said. "I was good at my job. My supervisor told me twice a year that I was good at my job. I never missed a deadline. I stayed late when it was needed. I did everything asked of me." Nathan said nothing. "And then I raised a concern," she said, "about overtime. A reasonable concern, a legal concern, a concern that any HR department should have been able to handle in a week. And instead of handling it, your company made my life difficult, changed my schedule, made my supervisor cold, created an environment where I felt like the problem was me for asking." She held his eyes. "And then someone, not you, I'm not saying it was you, made a comment about my immigration status in front of 3 people as a warning." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I was a citizen," she said. "I have been a citizen for 6 years. That comment was made to frighten me. And it worked, not because I was afraid of deportation, because it told me that the company was willing to use anything to make me go away quietly." She stopped. She let that sit. "I signed the settlement because I needed it to be over," she said. "Not because I thought it was right, not because I believed the amount was fair. Because I had a 7-year-old daughter and I was exhausted and I needed to stop fighting." She looked at him steadily. "I want you to understand the distinction. I was paid to be quiet. That is not the same as being made whole." Nathan held her gaze. He did not look away. He did not reach for anything to say. "The comment about my immigration status," he said. "Who made it? Does it matter?" "Yes." She told him the name. Nathan sat with it. The name was a man who still worked at his company. A manager who had been there 7 years. A man Nathan had thought of as reliable and who he now understood he had never actually looked at carefully. "He's still employed there," Nathan said. "I know," Teresa said. "He won't be by end of day," Nathan said. Teresa looked at him carefully, like she was checking whether the statement was strategic, whether this was the lawyer in him calculating the gesture. She decided it wasn't. "I'm not asking you to do that," she said. "I know you're not." Nathan set his coffee down. "You're not asking me for anything. I understand that. You came here to tell me something, and I'm hearing it." He paused. "The termination is separate. That's not for you. That's because I have an obligation to everyone who works for me to not have a manager who does that, and I failed at that obligation for 2 years because I didn't look closely enough." Teresa was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. The settlement, he said. My attorney will tell me the clauses in question are technically unenforceable and that you have no legal path to renegotiate it. He's probably right. He paused. I'm not interested in the technical position. Teresa watched him. Tell me what fair looks like, he said. Not what the settlement says, what fair actually looks like. She stared at him. She had not been prepared for this. She had prepared for defensiveness. She had prepared for the managed version. The careful language, the limited acknowledgement, the professional sympathy that gestures at feeling without committing to it. She had not prepared for a man asking her directly what fair looked like. She thought about it seriously because the question deserved seriousness. She thought about the 4 years and the 7-year-old and the exhaustion and what she had lost. That money couldn't measure the sense of safety at work. The belief that raising a legitimate concern would be met with a legitimate response. The particular confidence of a woman who had been good at her job and had been made to feel that the job was contingent on her silence. She couldn't put a number on that, but she put a number on what the overtime had actually been worth. She said it. Nathan didn't counter. I'll have an amount transferred by end of week, he said. Not through legal, directly. Teresa looked at him for a long moment. Why, she asked? He understood the question. It was the same question Sarah had asked at the restaurant underneath the surface of everything else. The question of whether any of this came from somewhere real or whether it was all still management and positioning in the careful calculation of a man protecting his assets. Because I have a manager who used your immigration status as a weapon, he said. Because I had a settlement process that was designed to make problems go away rather than solve them. Because 4 years of good work should have produced something other than exhaustion. He paused. And because a woman I'd never met sat across from me at a table 3 months ago and told me the truth without asking for anything, and I can't unknow it. Teresa sat with that for a moment. She picked up her coffee. I'm going to be honest with you, she said. Please. I don't trust this yet, she said. I want to, but I don't, not fully. She held the mug. What you're doing might be real, or it might be the version of Nathan Caldwell that exists when there are consequences, and I don't know which one I'm sitting across from. She looked at him directly. So I'm going to take what's offered, and I'm going to watch, and I'm going to wait and see who you are when the newspaper isn't watching anymore. That's fair, Nathan said. I know it is, she said. She finished her coffee. She stood up. She picked up her bag. Mr. Caldwell, she said. He looked up at her. The woman at the gas pump, she said. I read about her. Yes. She didn't know about me, about Vernon, about any of it. Teresa looked at him steadily. She just needed Gab and you decided she was less than you. And somehow that one afternoon cracked the whole thing open. She shook her head slowly, not in disbelief, but in the particular acknowledgement of something improbable and true. You should probably think about that. She left. Nathan sat at the table alone with his coffee until it was cold. He thought about it. Sarah found out about the meeting with Teresa from Cole, who found out from Richie, who heard from Teresa's lawyer friend that it had gone better than expected and that the transfer was confirmed and that Teresa had said at the end of the call, I still don't fully trust him, but I'm watching. Sarah was at the kitchen table with her notepad when Cole told her. She set her pen down. She didn't say anything for a moment. Teresa Ochoa is brave, she said finally. You've said that before. It's still true. She picked up her pen again. What about the council review? Still ongoing, Cole said. Maggie says it's going to take 6 months, maybe more. But the councilman who's most exposed is already talking about not running for re-election. That's something. It's the beginning of something, Cole said. Which is different. She nodded. Vernon, she asked. Restarted. Hired 2 people from his old crew. Marcus came back from Texas. Sarah stopped writing. Marcus came back, she said, 2 weeks ago. She sat with that for a long moment. She thought about Marcus, a man she had never met in a city he had left with 3 kids. She didn't know the names of coming back to Arizona because a phone call had been made, because a contract had been offered, because a story had run, because a woman at a gas pump had refused to pick up money off the ground. That chain of causation was not clean. It was not simple. There were a dozen moments in it where it could have broken, where someone could have stayed silent or walked away or let the managed version of things substitute for the real one. But it hadn't broken. Cole, she said, yeah, I want to tell you something. He sat down across from her. I don't think I'm the reason any of this happened, she said. I want to be clear about that. Maggie Torres had been building that file for 2 years. Richie found the records. Vernon had already done the work, and the assessment had already said so. Teresa had already filed. The injustice was already there. She looked at him. I didn't create any of it. I just happened to be the moment that made it visible. Yes, Cole said, but I want to tell you what I think actually made it move. Tell me. I didn't pick up the money, she said. Cole looked at her. That's it, she said. That's the whole thing. I looked at the money on the ground and I didn't pick it up. Because I knew in my body before I'd thought it through that picking it up would mean agreeing with what it said about me. She paused. And I couldn't agree with that. Not because I'm extraordinary, not because I have you and the club behind me, but because the alternative agreeing that I was what he decided I was something I couldn't do and still live with myself. She looked at the table. That's not courage. That's just knowing your own floor, knowing the place you won't go below. Cole was quiet for a moment. You're wrong about one thing, he said. What? That is courage, he said. Knowing your floor and standing on it when someone is trying to pull you under it. That's exactly what courage is. She looked at him. She didn't deflect it this time. She held it. Okay, she said quietly. The months after that moved the way months move in a life that is already full, not dramatically, not cinematically, but in the accumulation of ordinary things that are the actual texture of living. Dolores Vega started coming to the community center on Wednesday afternoons because Sarah had mentioned the senior social group and Dolores had initially said no and then said yes, and now she was the person who made the coffee every week and who remembered everyone's birthday. Patricia had her apartment back and then a better apartment and then a job offer in the same building as her new apartment, which was a coincidence so improbable that Patricia called Sarah laughing about it, and Sarah laughed too genuinely without any of the performed happiness that sometimes sneaks into the laughter of people who help others for a living. Vernon Price's company took on 2 more contracts in the spring. Marcus's kids enrolled in school locally, and his wife got a job at the hospital. Vernon called Sarah once to tell her this not because she'd asked, but because he wanted someone to know who would understand why it mattered. She understood. The council review concluded in the fall. Its findings were what Maggie Torres' records had suggested they would be: a pattern of irregularity in the rezoning process, 3 recommendations for policy reform, 1 formal referral to the state ethics board. The councilman who had not run for re-election was replaced by a woman named Iris Delgado, who had been on the city's housing commission for 6 years and who had, as one of her first acts, called the Willowbrook Community Center to ask what the council could do better for the East Side families. Sarah had taken that meeting herself. She had brought her notepad. Nathan Caldwell spent the fall in a different kind of work. The East Side development proceeded, but differently, with a community partnership element he had built in at the redesign meeting with his architect, a set-aside that created affordable commercial space for small business owners, a landscaping contract that went to Vernon Price's company, a process that involved the remaining East Side residents in the site planning in a way that his previous projects never had. It was not perfect. It was not redemption. It was the incremental, imperfect, structurally demanding work of changing the logic of a business that had been built on a different logic for 2 decades. Gregory Foss came back. Not all at once, not with a ceremony. He called Nathan at the end of the summer and said, I've been watching. And Nathan said, I know. And Gregory said, I want to believe it's real. And Nathan said, I can't make you believe it. I can just keep doing it. And Gregory said, then keep doing it. And that was the conversation. No grand reconciliation, no explicit restoration, just an older kind of partnership, more clear-eyed and more conditional. And because of that, more honest than the one that had existed before. Sarah heard about most of this from Cole, who heard from Richie, who kept his hand in things the way Richie always did, not intrusively, not with agenda, just with the steady situational awareness of someone who thought it was useful to know how things landed. She did not follow Nathan Caldwell's story closely. She had her own work. The list on her notepad was always 7 names long, because every time one situation resolved, another one materialized, and that was not a tragedy, but a purpose. She still drove the old truck. Cole had offered twice to help her get something newer. She had said no both times, not out of stubbornness, but because the truck ran fine and it was hers, and she had driven it through every version of her life for 8 years, and she was not interested in replacing something that worked simply because someone else had tried to use it against her. The truck was not evidence of her struggle. It was evidence of her consistency. She thought about that sometimes, pulling into the community center parking lot, the same faded green, the same cracked vinyl seat, the same 3 radio stations, and the Spanish language gospel she had grown to love. She thought about the gas pump on Route 9 in the afternoon heat and the money on the ground and the decision, the one instant reflexive bone-deep decision not to pick it up. She thought about Teresa Ochoa watching, about Vernon Price's crew on a job site on the east side, about Marcus's kids in school, about Dolores making coffee on Wednesday afternoons, about Iris Delgado with her notebook and her questions, about Cole's voice on the phone the night she'd driven home, shaking saying what happened, and about what it had meant to answer. She thought about the woman in the newsroom who had spent 2 years building a file that couldn't close until something cracked open, and about the specific crack that had done it. An ordinary Tuesday, an empty tank, a card that wouldn't work, a man who decided in 10 seconds what she was worth, and a woman who knew not because she was exceptional, not because she had backup, but because she knew herself well enough to know her floor, that she was worth more than what he decided. That was the whole story. Not the motorcycle club, though they were real, not the restaurant confrontation, though it mattered, not the newspaper story, though it changed things, not even the meetings with Vernon and Teresa, though they were necessary and true. The story was a woman who stood at a gas pump on a hot afternoon and decided quietly without witnesses that she would not agree to be less than she was. Everything else was what happens when one person decides that. Everything else is what the world does when someone refuses to go below their floor. Sarah Whitmore parked her truck, picked up her notepad, and walked through the door of the Willowbrook Community Center to start her day, and the next name on her list was already waiting.